Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari, and today we're going to talk about the April new releases that I've already read this month, and if any of these books are worth your time to pick up, whether I liked it or not. Maybe something in what I say makes you think, I really want to read that. I should pick it up. Now, due to the FTC existing, I need to disclose that all of these books I received from the publisher via Netgalley as ARCs, except for the last one, which I received directly from the author. Still is an ARC. I had access to these books before they came out and I didn't pay anything for any of them, though I was not required to leave this review at all. Like, they don't care if I make a video or not. But the FTC does care that you say you got something for free. So if you ever are watching a video and you think a creator is bragging about having a lot of ARCs, probably not. They just legally have to say it in all of their videos. I hope you learned something from that. Let's go through the list of the books that I'm going to talk about in this so you can even see if you're vaguely interested by the covers, if you've heard of any of these books, if you want to stick around for the rest of the video. I will give you like a full description, full synopsis, everything like that later in the video. We're just gonna run through the books really quick here. First up, I have Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. Then I have a debut, A Short Walk Through a Wide World by Douglas Westerbecky. Whew, that was hard to say for no reason at all. Then I have The Hloc Queen, which is the second book in a series from Hannah Whitten. Then I have A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland. Finally, I have a novella slash a short story collection. It's technically a novella from like 3 different perspectives, creating 3 stories, but we're gonna call it a novella. So this is Stolen Fates by S.E. Bouvier. Alright, first up, Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. I read her debut novel last year and it was one of my favorite books. It like really cemented the idea for me that I want horror that is isolated. Isolated in terms of you're in space and no one can hear you scream. Like, it reads so good. So this being her newest novel, I was like, yes, most anticipated of the year. I need this right now. This follows a woman named Ophelia, and Ophelia's a psychologist studying a specific space-borne disease called ERS. Which I'm gonna tell you right now, ERS sounds a lot like hysteria, where it's not actually a disease and people don't know how to explain like the mental form of isolation that you get from space, and so they just lump everything into this random category of, I don't know what this is, let's call it ERS. She is traveling with a group of workers, space workers, who are going to establish a residency on this planet. And the planet has previously been abandoned by another corporation, so they're just going in, making sure everything's set up for like permanent scientists and stuff to study, right? 5-week role. One of their colleagues died via suicide on their previous mission, and they assume that, and it's assumed that she had ERS. So Ophelia is going with them as like a therapist because ERS is contagious and they don't want any of these other people to die. So that is what happens. And then it's a horror, so shit goes sideways pretty quickly. I gave this 2 stars. Yes, indeed, I passionately hated this so much. My real main issue with this was the main character. This book, being from her perspective, ruined my enjoyment of it entirely. I think if it was told from a different character, or even if she had like a different like career, if she wasn't a therapist, I think I would have liked it more, because this woman is the worst therapist and it pissed me off. She's very self-centered. She cares more about what people think about her than actually helping people. So if people think that she's helping them, she's like, this is great. But if people are like hostile towards her, which you would think they would be if they're forced a therapist. She's like, she doesn't worry about helping them, or she tells herself she's worried about helping them. But her internal monologue is pretty much, why don't they like me? He's kind of cute. And it's very annoying. She also has an extensive amount of trauma and needs to get her own trauma handled before she becomes a therapist for other people. And her trauma is so extreme that it's probably not something that could ever be handled. And I think while she could have a career in this space, I don't think this particular one-on-one therapy type session thing with specifically this disease is the best for her. Maybe like a group counselor or a researcher or something. And that's really my only complaint. The story itself, the horror, very entertaining. I liked it a lot. The pacing of the book is a little bit weird, but not bad enough that it bothered me. I think it was mostly like, I felt the pacing was bad because I hated her so much and I wanted to get out of her head, but you couldn't escape it since it's told from her perspective. I had both a ebook and an audiobook arc of this, so halfway through I switched to the audiobook, and that was a little bit better to get through. I think the audiobook of this is very well narrated. I just really hated the character, so it's hard for me to say positive things about the rest of the book because everything I experienced was tainted by the perspective character. The only thing I would say about the audiobook is part of the horror is hallucinations, and it was very hard to tell via audio if the character was hallucinating or not, and I felt like it was very easy to tell that they were hallucinating when I was physically reading it. All of this to say, if this type of character wouldn't bother you, like a self-centered psychiatrist, I don't actually remember if she's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but if that person doesn't bother you, you'll probably like this book. I think this is an entirely me thing and not liking this type of person in general, but I think this book definitely will still have a decent audience, and don't let me and my hatred for this woman scare you away. All that being said, I will definitely read something again by S.A. Barnes in the future. Next up, I have A Short Walk Through a Wide World by Douglas Westerbecky. This, in the description it says The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue meets The Life of Pi. I've never read nor watched The Life of Pi, so I can't attest to that, but I would say The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and The Starless Sea have a baby, and I loved that baby. This is a 5-star rating for me. So we go from something I expected to like and hated to something that I had zero expectations on because it's a debut and I've never read from this author before, and gave 5 stars. This follows a woman basically throughout her life. I think she's 6 when the book starts, and then in her 60s or 70s when the book ends. And her name is Aubrey, and she was born in Paris. At 9, she was 9, she's cursed. And the curse is constant movement. So she has to start traveling the world. If she overstays what her illness, her inner demon, considers her welcome, which is like a max of 4 days, she will start bleeding from every orifice. So she has to keep moving. She also can't return to a place she's ever been before. It's constant worldly travel, and that's what we're seeing throughout the entire book. This doesn't have, I mean, it has a plot, but the point of this isn't a plot. The point of this is just the experience of it, like the beautifully written adventures of this woman. This is one of those things where you think that, oh my god, I would love to be able to spend my entire life traveling. It's not as great as you think it would be. She can't settle down anywhere. She can't go back and revisit people that she cares about, that she's met along the way. With a max 4 days in any given area, she's not building long-lasting relationships or anything like that, and it's not very easy for her to make money, to make a living. This takes place this starts in like 1885, so there's no airplanes, there's no telephones, there's no vehicles. She is walking the entire world. Layered onto this is this like mystical, magical underground library that connects the entire world through that only Aubrey can see. This is just whimsical and beautiful. There's no real answers. There's some answers, but the point of this isn't to figure out like what happened to her or why this has happened to her or why she's cursed or anything like that. It's just the beauty of the experience and the lyrical writing, which is something that I personally love, but some people would be like, I hate this, I never want to read it. So I will leave that for you to decide based on what I've said. Next up I have A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland. This is a retelling of The Selkie Wife, and it takes place in a undisclosed time frame that is somehow England in the past. There's no cars, but there is a lighthouse, so that could be hundreds of years, honestly. It's very generic, and I don't think it necessarily needs a specific time frame setting. Just know vague English fishing village in the past. Go from there. This follows a woman named Jean, and Jean is a midwife. She wakes up in the middle of the night, storm raging outside, something woke her up, she doesn't know what it was, assumed it was a dream, hears somebody screaming, and she's like, oh, I'm imagining things now, until she hears somebody screaming again. She goes outside and finds a young woman in labor, like right outside of her house, and so she bundles her in, delivers the baby, all is happy because this woman's the great midwife, and then shit goes downhill from there because you need a plot for the book. I DNF'd this book somewhere between like 60 and 70% in. Like I would gotten really, really far, but this put me in such a reading slump that I didn't finish a book for like 5 days. I hated this book. I think this is a case of me requesting a book that I should have never requested based on the plot of the story, because there's so many things in here that I know I just hate reading about, and this book was never meant for me. First off, it's more historical fiction than fantasy. When I DNF'd it somewhere between 60 and 70%, there was no fantastical element. Like, I know that there is a fantastical element and what it is because it's the Selkie Wife, but you're not going to get that until like the very end of the story. So if you're going in here looking for like a fantasy world, you're not going to get it. It's just historical fiction. Another thing I hated was the anti-queerness of the story. Jean is a lesbian, and she is almost ostracized from the community for her love of other women. The only thing keeping her in the community is the fact that she's such an amazing midwife. But everybody hates her. She's kind of on the outskirts of the community. People are always judging her and, you know, gossiping about her and stuff like that because she likes women, and there's no resolution for this. Set in the time period that it is, they hate queerness, and she's never going to be able to be happy in this community. Maybe in the end she'll find happiness, but I don't want to read hundreds of pages about anti-queerness. In addition, again, due to the time frame, it's very anti-woman. The woman that she finds outside of her house has a abusive husband. This man kidnapped her, sexually assaulted her, forced her into a marriage, keeps her from learning English so she can't communicate or tell people how abusive he is to her. And so women have no agency. There's nothing they can do about this because a man can discipline his wife how he wants. Like, I don't want to read about abusive men. I don't care about abusive men. If I wanted to read about abusive men, or if I was going to, I would do it in a non-fiction setting for educational purposes. I mostly read fiction for escapism, and I'm not getting escapism when it's anti-queer, anti-woman. And then the final thing, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, I don't like kids. I don't like reading about like babies and stuff like that, and if you're following a midwife, there's gonna be lots of babies. That was probably the least of my problems. I also thought the pacing of this was like glacier. It was so slow. It was so repetitive. It's like, yes, we know he's abusive. You can move on from that and tell us something new. Like, I don't care anymore. I didn't care the first time. I definitely don't care the 5th time that you're demonstrating how skeevy and abusive this guy is, or how everybody hates you because you're a lesbian. Like, can we please get to some sort of point instead of just all of this sad stuff? I end up DNFing this, so I don't know how it ends. I don't know if that makes it any better, but I can't imagine that it would. And I don't think these things would bother a lot of people. So I think that if you know that these aspects aren't going to bother you when you're reading, pick it up. The only warning I would have for you then is the pacing's a little bit slow. And maybe the pacing feels better if you're not constantly disgusted by the content. Next up was the Hloc Queen, which is the 2nd book in the Nightshade Crown trilogy, the first being the Foxglove King. So for this synopsis, I'm just going to give you the synopsis of the Foxglove King so I don't spoil anything if you haven't read that book. But this is fantasy romance where in this universe the gods have died, and wherever their bodies are buried or left, their magic kind of leaks out of them, and the kingdom that they live in is built on top of the tomb of the goddess of death. So she leaks something called mortem, which is the magic of death, and there are like priests and stuff like that who can use it, but there's this woman named Lore who is like this super powerful mortem user, and she is a criminal, like underground criminal type lady. She gets caught using mortem and is taken to the palace / church, supposedly to be killed for her illegal use of this magic when she's not part of the church, but instead she is recruited by the king and the priesthood to try to help figure out why all these people in the countryside keep like mass dying. The story itself is fine. Like, I don't really have any issues with the story. It's fairly basic. It's a little bit slow. I liked Hannah Witton's first series, like the Red Riding Hood retelling thing. I can't even remember what it's called. I can picture the cover in my head, but I can't remember what it's called. It's up here. I liked this series. A lot of people didn't, but I did. I don't like this one as much, but there's nothing like super wrong with it. It's just, it's forgettable to me, maybe. Like, I feel like death magic should be cooler. The romance in here is, it's just confusing to me more than anything. First off, I can't tell why any of these people like each other. It's supposed to be a polyamorous relationship that's a lot of pining for each other. Like, they all are in love with each other. 2 men and her, but they're like all in love with each other. Like, the men are attracted to each other, both men are attracted to her, and she's attracted to both men. Like, true love triangle here, but it's just a bunch of miscommunication, and like I said, I can't figure out what anybody sees in each other. It's just not well described, this attraction. Like, we're told that they're head over heels in love with each other, but why? But why? So, I don't know. It feels like the death stuff is kind of cool, but it's also really forgettable. I don't know. It's a 3-star, it's just fine. It's just not amazing. Last but definitely not least is Stolen Fates by S.E. Bouvier, and this is a prequel novella. The first book is called When Gods Fall, and that was released last year. Now, this is one of the coolest ideas I've ever seen from an author. This is very short. Very, very, very short. Maybe 100 pages. It doesn't say on Goodreads yet how many pages long it is, but it took me like under 2 hours to read. And it was just 3 little short stories where we are introduced to 4 of the main characters of the series and the universe, like the magic system, the politics, things like that. Everything in here supposedly happens prior to the events of the first book. I'm gonna assume it does because I haven't read the first book. I don't know, I can't answer that question. And nothing in these stories feel like information that's so important that like you have to read this first or you have to read it after the events of the first book. Kind of like the Assassin's Blade prequel novellas. Like you shouldn't read that until like after the 3rd or 5th book or something like that. Like this doesn't feel that way. This feels like something that you can either read prior to reading the first book. Let's say you're not the type of person who reads a lot and you don't want to randomly jump into a 400-page, a 600-page novel by an author you've never heard of, you've never read from. Like you don't know if this is going to be for you. I think something like this where you can meet the characters, you could see what the magic system is, you can see where the politics of this universe are coming into play, but it's not like a huge time commitment. And I can tell you from reading this that I want to, like 100%, as soon as I finish recording this, I'm going to go pick up the first book. I don't know that I'm going to read it immediately, but it's definitely something I want to read in the future because I'm so interested in these characters and this world. And I want to know how it works. Like what happens? What's the story here? To me, it felt like the fantasy Roman Empire invaded ancient Greece. Like if they existed at the same time. And you've got this story of like what I mentally compared to the Roman Empire invading England at the time, but the gods and goddesses of ancient Greek. Like that was so cool to me. I really liked the characters. Like I didn't get a lot of the characters. Again, it's very short. This doesn't feel like a complete story by any stretch of the imagination, but I was like very interested in exploring this world more. And now I want to read the book. And this gave me more than like a synopsis would, but was also a very, very short amount of time to gauge interest. I also think that if you've read the first book in the series and you just want more interactions with your favorite characters, that going back to this would be another good option. So, I don't know, I've never seen something like this before. And maybe it exists and I've just never experienced it, but I thought this was a really cool idea and I like it. And I definitely recommend picking it up. And those are all of the April releases that I've read so far this month. There are other ones that are coming out that just didn't make it into this video that I did not get advanced reader copies of and I'm gonna have to like buy. I may or may not get to them this month. We'll see. If you're interested in full reviews on like every single book that I read, every time I read a book I talk about it on TikTok. So my TikTok is linked down below. You can just follow me on TikTok, and if you want to know like a short few minute review on what I thought about every single book that I cover in these videos or outside of them, you'll find it over there. I also write a review of all the books that I read on Goodreads if you would rather read my review than listen to me talk about things. Let me know down in the comments below if you are going to pick up any of these new releases or if you already have. And I will see you next week for a new video. Bye!